Hi, boys and girls. It's time for Chapter 5 of The Water Horse. When we were reading Chapter 4, we found out that there's a big concern that there could be a problem for Crusoe out in the goldfish pond. He might not be safe out there. So in Chapter 5, we're going to find out who causes Crusoe some problems. The title of Chapter 5 is In the Midst of Foes. There's a line in a very old hymn that says, "Thou art in the midst of foes." A foe is an enemy. And though none of them realized it, Crusoe was. The first foe came on 4 feet. Early one morning when Crusoe was 3 months old, Kirsty awoke just before dawn to hear a noise in the distance. It was a sharp, fluty sound. Mother heard it too. She took it for a bird, turned over, and went back to sleep. Grumble, wakeful in the early part of the night, as old people often are, had dropped off to sleep at last. Angus, of course, was sound asleep, and he heard nothing. The whistle came again. Behind the small white house on the cliff top was moorland, great stretches of heather and peat bog where the curlew trilled their sad, bubbling cries, and the red grouse shouted, "Go back, go back." But whatever was whistling that morning was coming closer, coming off the moor and inching towards the house. And suddenly an awful thought struck Kirsty. So she jumped out of bed and grabbed a book from her bookcase. It was called Wild Animals of the British Isles, and because she was interested in such things, it was a favorite of hers. Something she had been reading recently rang alarm bells in her mind, and hastily she found the page she wanted. She skimmed hurriedly through life history, yearly life, daily life, food, until she came to the voice section of the book. A hiss when playful or scared, a squeal when angry, a sharp, fluty whistle when... Even as she read it, the noise came again. Very nearly now, she could tell that she was listening to the whistle of an otter. Throwing on her bathrobe, Kirsty rushed downstairs, stamped her bare feet into her boots, and dashed out of the house. It was light enough to see a long, low, slung, humpback shape across the grass coming towards the goldfish pond. Kirsty knew it ate all sorts of fish, and to this otter, the water horse would just be a different variety. She opened her mouth and let out the loudest yell she'd ever yelled in her life, and a very surprised and startled otter turned and galloped away as fast as he could on its short legs. Kirsty knelt by the pond, panting from the effort of running and from the mixture of fear and anger that had gripped her, and in a moment the sleeping form of Crusoe floated up. His nose poked out of the pond, and he took a breath, and he sank back down again. He had not heard Kirsty's shouts under the water, nor of course had Angus, but soon Mother and Grumble came hurrying to see what was the matter. "What can we do?" said Kirsty when she talked to Grumble and her mother about the problem. "The otter might come again." "I doubt it will," said Grumble. "The noise you made certainly frightened the life out of it. It frightened me. But just in case, let's take some steps to protect Crusoe." That morning, Grumble made a big frame, a wooden frame with wire netting stretched over the top of it. They put it on the pond like a lid, and throughout the rest of that summer it remained there, day and night, and it was only lifted off when Crusoe was playing when they were playing with Crusoe or feeding him. The second foe came on 2 feet. A month or so later, in the autumn, it just so happened that no one was home that day. Mother had caught the bus to go do the week's shopping, and the others had gone down to the sea to beachcomb and to catch food for Crusoe. He would be safe, they thought, under his wire lid. They had nearly reached the top of the cliff path on the way back. Grumble was carrying a load of driftwood, and the children a bucketful of fish each, when suddenly they heard from the direction of the goldfish pond a sudden, loud, harsh croaking noise. "Frank," is what it sounded like. "Frank, Frank, Frank." "Quick," shouted Grumble, throwing down his load. "Put down those buckets and run." "What is it?" cried the children. "A heron." "Oh, no," thought Kirsty as she ran. Not only had she read about them in her book, but she had seen a heron before, standing in the shallows of the loch, with its long legs and its long neck outstretched, peering forward into the water. She had seen it pause, motionless, and then with lightning speed it stabbed downward with its long beak and it speared a fish. But the scene that met their eyes was actually more comic than tragic. The heron had indeed tried to stab the water horse, but the point of its beak was stuck in the wire mesh of the protective frame. "Rank!" cried the bird again, tugging madly to free itself at the sight of the approaching humans. And at last it succeeded, and jumped into the air and flew away with slow flaps of its great curved wings. "There's blood in the water," said Angus somberly, and indeed, the tip of the heron's bill had gone far enough through the water to nick Crusoe's back. But it wasn't much more than a scratch, and Crusoe didn't seem that worried about it. Here's a picture of the heron for you. He ate all the fish they had caught with his usual gusto. The third foe came in the winter. It was not a four-legged foe or two-legged foe. It had no substance. It could not be seen or smelled or heard. But the arrival of the first two foes was a surprise. The arrival of the third foe was actually broadcast on the news. One evening early in the new year, Grumble sat listening, as was his custom, to the radio, waiting for the weather forecast so that he could, as was his custom, grumble about it. And then news of the third foe came onto the radio. "Tonight," said a voice, "there will be widespread frost in Scotland. It will be severe in the Highland and the Grampian areas, though only slight in the western parts." As usual, the west coast of Scotland was to come off lightly, thanks to the warm waters coming off the Gulf Stream flowing across the Atlantic. But the threat of even a slight frost was enough for Grumble to be on guard. On checking it last thing that night, he found the surface of the goldfish pond still unfrozen, but by first thing the next morning, there was a thin skin of ice on the pond. Before breakfast, he stood with the children and watched as Crusoe, obviously enjoying himself, rammed his way through the ice, breaking it up with a cracking noise. "He's an icebreaker," said Angus, running around the pond, arms outstretched and fingertips together in the shape of a ship's prow. "An icebreaker in the Antarctic. Old Crusoe is full speed ahead. Crash, bang, wallop." "Oh, but before too long he may not be able to break it," said Grumble to Kirsty. "Why not?" said Kirsty. "Because they're saying now that this is the start of a really cold spell, and in a few days, a small pond like this could be frozen quite thick." "Too thick for Crusoe to break," said Kirsty. "Could be." "Thick enough to slide on," said Angus. "That would be a lot of fun for me." "It wouldn't be any fun for Crusoe, you silly boy," said Kirsty. "If he was stuck under the ice, he wouldn't breathe." "He would drown," said Angus. He clasped both hands around his throat, stuck out his tongue, crossed his eyes, and made a dreadful gurgling noise of suffocation. "Oh, don't be so stupid," Kirsty said. "Grumble, what can we do?" "We'll have to move him." "To the loch?" "Yes, the loch will never freeze." "But what about the pike, the otter, the heron?" "Well, I reckon he's big enough now to look after himself." And indeed, the water horse, now being 10 months old, had grown enormously. The pond had long been empty of animal life, except for him, since he had eaten everything in it, and his demands of food meant that for some time now, the family had been making 2 trips a day to the beach to collect enough food for him. He was as big as, well, it's difficult to measure him against any animal, because the comparison to the cat and the kitten, you could say he's nothing like that now. Maybe the size and the weight of a half-grown tiger? Like a tiger, his body had grown very long, though of course he did not have legs and feet, but simply those 4 big diamond-shaped flippers. "Well, he's big enough to look after himself," said Angus. "Blow me down, I should think he is. I bet he could beat up that old otter, and that old heron, too. He'd shiver their timbers, right, Grandpa?" "But how are we going to move him?" asked Kirsty. "That's what's worrying me," said Grumble. "I've waited a bit too long. I planned to get him into the wheelbarrow, somehow, but I doubt I could do that on my own. I couldn't ask anyone else, or the secret of the water horse would certainly get out. This is the problem. I need the help of a strong man." "What shall we do?" said Kirsty. "Let's have breakfast," said Angus. "I'm starving." Oh, he never stops thinking about food. As they walked toward the house, they caught the sign of Posty, the mailman, riding away down on his old red bicycle. He was coming down the road on his old red bicycle. And when they came into the kitchen, Mother was standing there looking very happy. "Guess what?" she said to the children. "It's from your father. His ship has berthed in Clyde yesterday. He'll be home this very morning." That's the end of chapter 5. Chapter 6 is tomorrow, and it's called Home is the Sailor. I hope you're enjoying the book, boys and girls. Bye.